Hello and welcome. I'm Geeta Mohan and you're watching India Today Global. The additional tariffs imposed by the US have finally come into effect, which threatens a little over half of India's exports to its world's largest market. Trump administration alleged that India has been fueling the Russian war machinery by buying Russian oil and selling it at cheap rate in the open market for its own interests. Now, with the additional tariffs kicking in, tariffs doubled to 50%. So what next for India? The first countermeasure following the tariff was announced, and the outreach programs have started to 40 markets across the world, which includes the UK, Japan and Korea. The aim is to boost India's textile exports. The outreach will also include markets in Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Poland, Canada, Mexico, Russia, Belgium, Turkey, UAE and Australia. Next, the Commerce Ministry is busy meeting and engaging with exporters from across various industries, which will include chemicals, gems and jewelry. However, pharmaceuticals and electronic goods have been exempted from tariffs. The move threatens to affect 70% of exports from labor-intensive units like textiles, which in turn could result in thousands of job losses. Minister of State for External Affairs Sirivardhan Singh said the tariffs are totally unjustified and unfair. India and US have had 5 rounds of negotiations for a bilateral trade agreement, and the 6th round, which was scheduled this week to start, couldn't take place as the US delegation called off its visit amid trade tensions. Amidst all this, there seems to be some mixed signals coming from America. While US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated today, and I quote, "At the end of the day, I think we will come together with India." On the other hand, Director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett, said if India does not budge, President Trump will neither. Take a listen.
If you want to know how we look at the tariffs, we feel these tariffs are totally unjustified and they're unfair. Because the reasons that have been given to us, those same causes, those same reasons apply to many other countries. But the tariffs have been selectively imposed on us. So that's why I say they are unreasonable, unjustified, and unfair. But our economy is strong enough. Our government will protect the interests of our country. And we will continue to look at markets for all resources because we have a very large population whose energy security also has to be addressed.
I think that it is a complicated relationship, that it's integrated some with the problems that we're trying to put extra pressure on Russia so that we can get a peace deal to save millions of lives, and the Indian intransigence about opening their markets to our products. And so I think that when you're looking at trade negotiations, one thing I think we've all learned is that you need to keep your eyes on the horizon and recognize that there are going to be ebbs and flows in things before we reach the final position. And if the Indians don't budge, I don't think President Trump will either. So thank you guys very much.
Now, amid the tariff war between India and the United States of America, in an exclusive interview to me with the Financial and Economic Planning Minister of Mauritius, Dr. Jyoti Jitun speaks about how de-dollarization can be effective if trade with India happens in local currency, and it is going to be a game changer. Listen in.
Our first line item in our imports is fuel, which we pay in dollars. Just imagine for 1 second if we were to import that from India and pay in Indian rupee. What a game changer it would be for our country. So I think there is huge potential to de-dollarize transactions in both countries and encourage, through tourism and whatever imports and exports that we are doing between our two countries, to be able to do that in our local currencies.
Well, that's the minister from Mauritius who spoke to me earlier in the day, talking about de-dollarization, exchange of goods in local currency, and that certainly could make a huge shift. You can catch the entire interview on India Today Global's YouTube channel. And the fact that there is a lot that India is doing is something we'll be focusing on in this show. The outreach is to about 40 markets across the globe. India is looking at how to ensure that the labor-intensive markets in India are not impacted by these tariffs. these tariffs are certainly going to impact labor-intensive industries in India, and therefore, for the Indian administration, for Modi government, it is important and essential to ensure that there are markets available for industries such as the textile industry, which will be hit very badly. There are other sectors that interestingly are kept out of these tariffs, pharmaceuticals in particular, because that's what America needs. So America is looking at self-interest, engagements continue, mixed signals coming from the United States of America when how to deal with India has come into question, and how are they dealing with India? On the one hand, one person from that very same White House coterie says that they are looking at better engagement. On the other hand, they say that should India not budge, President Trump will neither. So strong signals coming in, mixed signals coming in from the United States of America. We're focused on what this means for India and how India is going to approach this entire tariff war between the United States of America and India. There are many aspects. This is only the beginning of the Trump tariff war that has begun. And we have joining us over here to debate this, to have a conversation on this, Sanjeev Ahluwalia. He's a distinguished fellow, Chintan Research Foundation, and Anil Trigunath, ambassador, former diplomat. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. Let's begin with you, Sanjeev. Mixed signals coming in from the United States of America. How do you read what's happened? The tariffs have kicked off, but India is looking to diversify.
Yeah, I mean, this is the unpredictability of dealing with the United States, what's happening. But I would some reassessment of the enormous harm that these tariffs are likely to do to the Indian economy must have fed into the calculations. After all, we've had a fairly decent history of relationships with the United States. The commonality of broader interests beyond trade. Trade, of course, is obvious. They are, in a way, a pretty large partner of ours. We run a trade surplus with them, and which benefits us, and they have a grouse with that. But the larger relationship seems to have was going satisfaction of both countries.
Sanjeev, we are having a bit of trouble with your network. We'll try connecting with you. But in the meanwhile, we also have Willem Butter joining us. He's the economic advisor, a former global chief economist at Citigroup. Willem, thank you so much for joining us. But let me just go to Ambassador Trigunath first. Ambassador Trigunath, how do you think India's reaction has been so far, not just protecting the agro industry here in India, but also ensuring that there's an outreach to 40 other markets to diversify?
In fact, the India's response, I would say, has been pretty resolute and with the strategic patience. We have not reacted like we did in the first term of President Trump when he imposed duties on us. We immediately retaliated on that. He took India out of the GSP benefits, if you remember. So what he is doing this time is not very new. It's only the driver, in my view, which is driving him to this highly irrational behavior as far as India is concerned, which is not justified by any means, by any logic. So it is totally illogical to do so. Taking India out in that sense. But what India is doing, obviously, which is that first to assess what is going to be the impact. So about 50% of our overall products that are going to United States, which happens to be our largest market, are obviously going to be impacted by these duties. And about 40% of the total products, like the pharmaceuticals and the electronics, etc., have been kept out of the purview of the duties because they are needed by the United States. So to that extent, we have to look at how to diversify those 50% in the short term, and also to look at possibilities of making more dent and closer partnerships with other markets. I mean, there are a large number of countries that need to be plugged. It was easier to work because there was established partnership, but then you can't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say. So even if United States happens to be our largest trading partner, China is the second, or the European Union in that sense. So we'll have to continue to work on our free trade agreements, expedite those, work bilateral relationships, do in a transactional manner through rupee transactions, which India has now offered to about 22 countries. So all that is going to basically dampen the impact of the tariffs that are going to immediately have
Right.
some kind of a negative impact, especially for the individual SME exporters,
Hmm.
because see, they'll have to very quickly find out which are the other markets. And that's where the government has to do. And that's what you mentioned. About 40 countries outreach has been already initiated in the meantime while we are witnessing the unfolding, the impact of these tariffs.
William Buter, the fact that there is a lot of conversation that is happening on how it's going to impact India, but William, tell us how it's going to impact the United States of America as well, because this cannot be sustainable for America. India is a huge market. India is a huge exporter of goods to the United States of America. Is it a question of who blinks first?
Well, you shouldn't exaggerate this, right? I mean, only a very small proportion of US imports, 2.7%, comes from India. And the exports to India are even lower, well under 2% of all their exports. The US is somewhat more important for India, as both as an exporter and as a source of imports, but it's still not devastating. Note also that exports of services are not affected by these tariffs, only
Yes.
exports of goods. And that of the exports of goods, roughly 55 to 60% is likely to be affected. And that accounts for about 1% of Indian GDP. Now, that's painful, but it is manageable, right? And so certainly for the US, there is rather little direct economic pressure. India is growing very fast, and it could be the largest market in the world in 10 or 20 years. But at the moment, it is not a key strategic trading partner for the US from an economic perspective. India matters today for the US because it wants it to line up against China politically, economically, and strategically. But it is not a first order economic disaster, certainly not for the US. And even India should be able to manage this quite adequately, mostly by diverting exports to other open markets.
Okay, that's a saner voice coming in. Sanjeev, would you want to come in? Willem over here says, let's not exaggerate. The market is much larger than what we're looking at and how we're reading it. Do you think the impact on India is going to be far greater or lesser?
Well, I'd like to a little bit disagree uh, with the previous speaker, who made it sound that the US could dispense with India because it's a very small market. And of course, he's right on the data that yes, we are a very small market. But you have to consider that you trade only with friends. You don't trade with your enemies. And if we are not able to trade with the United States, then it's quite likely that we may not remain friends. And would the United States be happy losing a friend in Asia, which is going to be very soon third largest economy over here? Would that make sense for the United States? Because, friendships in India is not a country that is politically volatile. Our friendships last for decades. Our friendship with Russia dates back almost 70 years. So almost to the time that we got independence. And India was hoping that it was on the same track with the United States because we have so
Right.
much in common. our best talent is taken away. 60,000 of our engineers and other brilliant people, including one who I saw, I think, earlier, or maybe not on your show, but Dr. Rajan, they're Indian and they're benefiting the United States. Would they like to cut off this supply? And would they like to then also cut off all the achievements of the large diaspora, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of impact that the United States has? So I would posit that we had a very fruitful and a mutually beneficial friendship. And to be honest with you, we in India are absolutely puzzled as to what went wrong and why we were treated the way we have been. Having said that, India is not a country that dwells on the past, though we have a long history, I may assure you, but
Right.
we do not dwell in the past. And I would posit that whatever may have been the compulsions of President Trump, which made him do what he did, which we were not very happy with, I think we should still remain open. And it is my impression from what the ambassador, the Indian ambassador mentioned, that we are open to continuing with the dialogue, and we always have been. And we can
Absolutely.
talk about the issues that are of consequence to the US, and we can put forward our issues which are of consequence to us and reach an agreement.
Right. And
So I think
yes.
this is something we should, the dialogue must remain open and we must be totally engaged, even as we prepare for a possibility that the dialogue may not reach fruition and we may have to go our own way and the US would have to go its own way.
Right. Ambassador Trigunayat, a very important point, we should remain engaged. Now, India has hired a new lobbyist firm to lobby for India. Do you think that will really turn things around for India at a time when negotiations are not working, and in all probability we are being pushed to engaging China more and more? And I'll ask that to Willem, but to you first. Will this new lobby firm really help India change things?
Well, Geeta, number one, you know that US is a country where lobbies is an essential dimension of the foreign policy and diplomacy. They are used as access points, as pressure groups, as trying to swing things. But I'm not really betting so much on that. And there are not one but three firms that India has today
Yes,
deployed in this, and many countries do many more. Pakistan, at one time when I was there trade commissioner, I remember there were about four firms that were working only on Kashmir issue deployed with Pakistan. Right now, they were way ahead of us, and they started that. So this is something that goes on. But what I'm trying to say is, let us look at this way. And as Sanjeev also mentioned, trade is only one of the verticals of our relationship, and that is trade in goods, where President Trump, in a very myopic manner, has looked at it simply as a cost benefit analysis of the market. I mean, that is precisely does not work that way in any country. Every country has a comparative advantage,
that's
and
right.
it exploits that, and that's very much there. Besides, you know that today there was a discussion yesterday between the two defense and foreign ministry level, foreign and defense ministry level. There were discussions going on. There are discussions going on purchase of these GE engines for about $1.5 billion deal.
Right.
There are going to be in Alaska itself. We are going to have our military exercises jointly. So there are other dimensions of it. Unfortunately, the trade, the way it has gone on, and it has gone on a very lame excuse,
Right.
um, because of which it is not necessarily either because of the Russian oil or because of India's tariff strategy.
Okay.
It has something to be very personal.
Right. One last question to Willem here. Willem, very briefly, is Trump pushing India towards China?
Well, inevitably, behavior of this nature will weaken ties of all kinds between the US and India. It's not just, as correctly pointed out earlier, the trade links that are being challenged, but this has political, strategic, and geopolitical implications. So,
Right.
while I don't expect a major shift towards China as an ally the economic relationship is likely to deepen over time, to become more significant. Yes.
Right. William Buter, Sanjeev Ahluwalia, and Ambassador Trigunayat, thank you so much for joining us here on a conversation that we will be taking forward. Thank you. Now, India is battling Trump's tariff onslaught, but is this new for America or part of a centuries-old playbook of protection, power, and pressure? From Jefferson to McKinley, Lincoln to Trump, America has always weaponized tariffs. Here is an excerpt from Statecraft. You can watch the full show on India Today Global's YouTube channel. This photo says it all. The tariff men. Trump front and center, flanked by McKinley, Lincoln, Clay, and Jefferson, puts him in the long line of US leaders who knew how to flex economic muscle. Trump's 50% tariffs on imports steel, aluminum, and key goods? Just the latest move in centuries-old playbook. Tariffs, sanctions, trade wars, they're not new. America has been weaponizing its economy for generations. So the real question is, why does the US always reach for economic power, and does it actually work or just make a show of strength? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. Trump's trade attack has deep roots. The US has always used tariffs to protect itself, fund government, and push political goals. Thomas Jefferson, president from 1801 to 1809, opposed high protective tariffs. He favored low duties to encourage trade and keep goods affordable, reflecting the agrarian economy of the young nation. Jefferson's philosophy: limited government, free markets, and minimal interference. He enacted the Embargo Act of 1807 to avoid conflict with Britain and France, halting US maritime trade. This wasn't a tariff per se, but it showed early experiments with economic coercion. Southern states, reliant on imports, welcomed low tariffs. Northern manufacturers wanted higher rates. Henry Clay's American system shaped 19th century protectionism. He argued for three pillars: protective tariffs to shield US industries, a national bank to stabilize commerce, and federally funded infrastructure to unify markets. High tariffs made imports costly, encouraging Americans to buy domestic goods. Clay's plan aimed to reduce foreign dependence and strengthen the US economy. Southern states opposed high duties, feeling unfairly burdened, but Northern industrialists prospered. Abraham Lincoln fully embraced tariffs as a cornerstone of economic strategy. The Morrill Tariff of 1861, passed just before his inauguration, raised rates from roughly 15% to 37.5% and later climbing above 47%. It aimed to fund the Civil War and protect domestic manufacturing. Lincoln owed his nomination and election to Northern protectionists demanding high tariffs to shield American industry from Europe. Today, Trump's 50% tariff on India mirrors Lincoln-era logic: high stakes, clear messaging, and pressure through economic leverage. William McKinley, celebrated by Trump as inspiration, made tariffs central to US policy. As the House Ways and Means Committee chairman, he authored the McKinley Tariff Act of 1890, raising average import duties to nearly 50%, with tin plates spiking from 30% to 70% and wool goods sharply higher. The goal? Protect emerging industries like steel, textiles, and tin, stabilize the economy, and shield American workers from foreign pauper labor. Consumer prices rose, provoking backlash and political losses for Republicans in 1890. As president, McKinley passed the Dingley Tariff of 1897, setting rates near 57%, the highest in US history. Tariffs now had dual purpose: economic shield and moral imperative. The 1930 Smoot-Hawley tariff dramatized the risks of overreach. Over 20,000 goods faced steep duties to protect US farmers and industry. Global retaliation slashed trade. Imports fell 40% in 2 years, and the Great Depression worsened. Tariffs punished others but also hurt the home economy. During the Cold War, sanctions complemented tariffs. Tariffs hit imports, sanctions hit adversaries. Cuba, the USSR, North Korea and allies faced embargoes, asset freezes, and military export bans. The Trading with Enemy Act and Export Administration Act provided legal cover. After 1991, tariffs dropped, sanctions sharpened, NAFTA, WTO, and bilateral deals lowered trade barriers, yet trade disputes persisted. Sanctions targeted terrorism, nuclear ambitions, and rogue states: Iran, North Korea, Russia. The US leveraged the dollar to pressure non-US firms, applying extraterritorial force. History repeats itself, and India's firm response proves that leverage has limits when nations protect their sovereignty.